It's time for Supply Chain Now. Broadcasting live from the supply chain capital of the country, Atlanta, Georgia. Heard around the world, Supply Chain Now spotlights the best in all things supply chain. The people, the technologies, the best practices, and the critical issues of the day. And now, here are your hosts.
Hey, good morning. Scott Luton and Greg White with you here on Supply Chain Now. Welcome to today's show. Greg, how you doing?
I'm doing very, very well. We've talked to some really interesting folks today, and I'm looking forward to this.
This will definitely. So we've done our homework here. We've had some pre-show conversations. This is going to continue in that trend, no doubt. And on today's show, we're talking with a business leader from an industry dynamo that is empowering companies to successfully bridge that gap between plans and reality. And that gap for some companies is huge and massive. For others, they're getting a lot better at building that bridge. So we're going to dive into that, a lot more of that here momentarily. So stay tuned for a great conversation. But Greg, we've got a quick program note before we dive in with our guest. Where can folks go if they enjoy this conversation as much as we think they will?
Let me think about that, Scott. Well, they can go to our website, supplychainnow.com, or they can go to wherever they get their podcast from, or my favorite, YouTube.
That's right. Perfect. So y'all check that out. Make sure you subscribe for free so you don't miss conversations just like this one. So I want to welcome in our featured guest here today. We've enjoyed our conversations thus far. This promises to be another great one. Logan Ensign, Vice President, Client Solutions with Alloy. Logan, how you doing?
I'm doing really well. Excited to be on with you guys.
We are too. I feel like, as we talked about in the pre-show and talking with you and your team, I feel like I'm an honorary technologist. I've soaked up so much knowledge, and we've had a little fun as well along the way. So excited to share you with our community here at Supply Chain Now. So if we're all buckled in, let's dive right in. Because on the front end, we're gonna get to know Greg. We're gonna get to know Logan a little bit, and he's got some really cool stories and some things that you may just not know about one Logan Ensign. So let's start, Logan. Where are you from? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I grew up here in the San Francisco Bay Area, out here in California. So first 12 years of my life, I was in the East Bay in a town called Castro Valley, like 15 minutes from the Oakland Coliseum. So grew up going to Raiders games, Wednesday afternoon summers at the Coliseum. You get your whole section for an A's game. And then for high school, moved up to Santa Rosa, so Sonoma County, wine country up there. And then I went to school in Palo Alto in the South Bay. So all I've done is just, 20 miles.
Circle the bay.
Life. Exactly. And I'm actually back in the East Bay, live out here in Concord.
Everywhere but Sausalito, basically, right?
Yeah, no, gotta get more cash for that. Expensive.
So when you talk about the Raiders back, Bo Jackson instantly comes to mind. Now that may be a little bit for your time, Logan, and if it's not, you've got excellent genes, by the way. Bo was unstoppable until he went down with a hip dysplasia or something, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Playing for the Royals too. He was a monster. A little before my time, but he grew up a Raiders fan. The 90s aren't too memorable, so you kind of learn about when we used to be good. So
right.
Marcus Allen, Bo Jackson, it's a
Marcus
fun
Allen
sort of tradition. Al Davis, right? Yeah, I don't think I fit the stereotypical Raider fan, how people view us, but just love.
No, because I don't feel that it's imminently to happen that you will try to kill me. So you don't fit the stereotype at
all. No, it's safe. It's all fun. My 4-year-old daughter. I don't know if you guys know. There's a famous sort of NFL Films poem and theme song for the Raiders called "The Autumn Wind." And my 4-year-old daughter has memorized it, which is pretty fun. She
that's awesome.
Get her game face on and recite the poem.
Well, so is spiked shoulder pads on her holiday wish list? Is that?
I think she had fun dressing up. As a kid, I remember my uncle would come in he lives on the East Coast, but is a Raiders fan, and he'd rent a Mustang convertible, and we had this big flag with like a skull and crossbones on the top, and driving through downtown Oakland. So no, we did it right. It was sad to see him go, but it was really a fun community to kind of grow up in.
That's awesome. All right. So now that we have uncovered some of your favorite memories from your formative years, let's talk about one other interesting aspect that you're passionate about. We gotta know a lot more about these geckos, Logan.
Yeah. Well, so when COVID hit, working from home, and we do a lot of video calls, and so this became sort of my backdrop. And early on in March or April, on with a customer, and they said, "Logan, do you grow weed?" And so it is good to kind of get in the open. No, it's not my pot farm back here. These are crested geckos. So when I was in high school, I got one of these as a pet, and they were thought to be extinct until 1994. So they're an endangered
Wow.
species, and not a super common pet. And then, I started to realize, like, hey, these are $200, $300 a piece. And I got looking into, like, oh, maybe I could breed these and make some real money, especially as a high schooler. So I went out and I bought a female crested gecko. And a few months later, I remember it was Christmas Eve. I came up to my room and she died. She choked on a cricket, and that was sort of the end of the startup there.
Wow.
But when I married my wife, she knew this about me, that this was sort of part of my youth. And I don't even know how we came across it, but we were on Craigslist, and I found this listing of someone who's selling 15 crested geckos and all these enclosures and all this. And I texted it over to her and I said, "Hey, Kate, like, let's do it." And she's spontaneous and fun, and she's like, "Yeah, let's do it." And so we kind of like talked ourselves into it and just bought 15 of these geckos and started kind of a hobby together. At its heyday, we got probably 100 or 150 geckos at a time in our little apartment, and we shipped them 35, 40 different states all over the country, and it was sort of this thing. But fast forward, once we had kids, it was just too much to do, and so we got rid of all of them. But kind of coming back to my 4-year-old daughter, she is super into animals, and we were looking for things to do. So we've kicked it off again this year. So I think if we meet again next year, maybe it'll be twice.
You'll have 150.
Grow behind me as we scale. No, it's an odd hobby, but it's pretty fun.
So I got to ask you, Logan, when it comes to forecasting gecko demand, how challenging is that?
We can't keep up, right? I'm always sold out. I've got pre-orders. And so maybe a similar problem to some of the folks listening here. It's hard to keep up.
All right. Well, I appreciate you sharing. There's so much more there in what you shared about your upbringing and some of your cool passions. We're going to have you back and take a deeper dive on some of those passions. But today, Greg, we're talking about supply chain leadership. We're talking about retail. We're talking about some really cool, his journey and some cutting edge technology right now, right?
Yeah. Direct to consumer, and imagine the lead time on replenishing geckos, right? I mean, you have to take lead time into consideration, right?
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely. Yeah.
Not that you have much choice on the yield. Yield is sort of up to the product, isn't it? But yeah. But before we dive too deep into what you're doing today, Logan, let's hear a bit. First of all, I forgive you for being a Raiders fan. I just want to say that. Lifelong Chiefs fan. And
worlds collide.
They do, right?
Well, we still have 3 Super Bowls, so we'll see how.
Ouch!
He's a real Raiders fan.
He is a real Raiders fan.
Throwing it down first thing. Okay. No, let's talk about your professional journey a little bit before you landed at Alloy. Tell us a little bit about some of the positions that you held that maybe helped get you to where you are today. And if there were, and of course there always are, sort of these epiphanal aha moments in your life, and maybe a mentor or two that kind of helped shape your worldview or get you to where you are.
Yeah, no. So growing up, my dad was an R&D engineer at Medtronic, so in the cardiovascular division, and so a pure engineer. But he gave me some career advice early on and saying, "Hey, Logan, whether you like it or not, any job you take is sales. That skill set, as an engineer or research scientist, all the way up to true true sales. Like it's a skill set that is just critical to be successful professionally. And so straight out of college, I wanted to get that experience and took a job in commercial insurance sales. And my first job was full immersion, right? It was, okay, you're going to cold call and it's 50, 60, 70 calls a day. And you just got to go and hit the phones and you're measured on the outcome of that, right? And so, I think as you go through that process, and I don't know, I think you learn a lot just early in your career anyway. So I think maybe more epiphanies come earlier in your career than later, but, you get into this motion of, oh, maybe I can get a little more strategic, a little more thoughtful in how I approach these conversations. And yeah, there's always improvements you can make, but there's no getting around the fact that you just got to do the work, right? You just got to sit down and make the calls. And that's how you're going to get better from a skill set perspective, but it's also just a critical input in, being successful there. So, that was a bit of a grind, but you learn a lot about yourself as you get to interact with lots of people. I think moving out of that, I stayed in sales at the same company, but I moved more into the field, into like a closer role in commercial insurance. And I think for that, when you're in a pure sales role, it can be really, really maddening sometimes because you can do the best job you can do, right? And then ultimately it's up to the other person to decide, are they going to make that decision or not? And at the time I was reading Stephen R. Covey and just became enamored with this idea. And it's become a mantra of me kind of moving forward on like, hey, you're going to be most effective when you are focused on your area of influence. And if you are focused on things outside of your area of influence or your area of control, that's when you can start to spin and you can drive yourself nuts. And so just focus on what you can control. You're going to be effective in what you do, and the rest will work out, right? Because why worry about things that you can't control? So, I also learned in that job, I didn't want to be in pure sales, but you also, you learn you want to be working with people, the relationship components there. You can really start to kind of suss out what's important for you, you professionally. So yeah, I don't know if those are revolutionary ideas, work hard and focus on what you can control, but I think those are important skills or insights to kind of learn yourself, kind of getting your feet wet and getting into that a little bit.
Yeah, well, you had me at Stephen Covey. I mean, there's so much that can be learned there, and particularly, I mean, if you think about our world today, we don't want to go that broad, but if you think about our world today, I think more people would be more satisfied if they focused on their circle of influence. So, it's funny because I think of all the usual suspects, begin with the end in mind and that sort of thing, but that circle of influence is a very, very important concept. So very good. And to have learned that at a really young age that's a gift, frankly.
Well, and it's not my
that sets
nature.
you up for your journey really strongly, right?
Absolutely. It's not, I don't know if it's in a lot of people's nature to take that approach. So I think it's a good one to have on the forefront. Like, remind yourself, like, why am I worried about this? Right? Like, this is not something I control. What are the elements of this that I can do today to feel a little bit different about it? So, yeah. So
how did you land at Alloy? Tell us a little bit about that story. Cause I mean, you have an impressive past. I mean, an impressive resume, right? So tell us a little bit about how you landed at Alloy.
Yeah, no. So I jumped into SaaS. I've been in SaaS, software as a service, kind of software for a while now. But in my last role, about 3 years ago, I was living down in Southern California with my wife. She was 7 months pregnant at the time. We had a 2-year-old. She was about to defend her dissertation in neuroscience down there.
Neuroscience.
Yeah. Never enough work for her, is there?
Exactly. Yeah. And so, we just were not looking to move. I was happy where I was. But I think, you kind of develop in your mind sometimes, well, what do I want in my next role? What do I need that to look like? And I really determined that a key component of my next role, I needed to find a company that had a strategy really squarely in product first, right? And there are a lot of great ways to build a software company. But I think philosophically, I wanted to be really confident that the organization was over-investing in development, design, and really the primary objective of the company was we're going to build a really usable, intuitive, value-adding product for the user, right? And the reason that was important to me is my job can look a lot of different ways depending on the product, right? I mean, sometimes people in my position have to spend all their time just trying to convince people, like, please just log in, please just use the tool, and dragging them along, right? And what I wanted to make sure was kind of the dynamic is, okay, the tool speaks for itself. How can we take this to the next level? Like, help me understand your business processes, help me understand your pain points, and let's sort of collaboratively work on that sort of problem solving. So that was super important to me. So I got put in touch with Joel, who is our CEO, and he comes from a product background. He sat with me for an hour, maybe two, and we just talked the product. He showed it to me, and I was just blown away with how ahead of schedule it felt, right? And then learning that the company at that time was maybe 80% engineers, just kind of checked that box for me. So that was a big one. I think the other two pieces that were really compelling as I started to get to know Alloy and what we were about, I just started to get excited about supply chain. And I don't know if I'd admit that to just anyone, but I feel like
before 2020, you probably could have admitted it and nobody would have known what you were excited about.
Yeah, exactly. But as we really started to think about this, it's like, man, this is a space that's just ripe for technology. It's a great place to apply technology. And it's a place full of people interested in data. And it's this big, complicated optimization problem. So kind of that data nerd, it just really appealed to me as sort of a space that's just ripe for, hey, this is a great place to build a software company. And then, the last piece.
Can I butt in for a second, Logan?
Yeah.
Can I butt in for a second? Do you believe that, especially with the types of sales you were involved in early in your career, graduating into being that closer, were you already a data nerd that used that to close deals, or did you have an epiphany? You got to tell us, as a fellow nerd, I got to know.
It's a great question. Yeah, I was probably always a little bit of, well, not to say that salespeople can't be data nerds, right? But it's not necessarily what you associate. But no, I even super early in, like, how many calls does it take me to get a second call, to get what's the average deal size? Like, all those sorts of inputs have always been interesting to me, right? Even as a kid with going back to the sports thing, like Moneyball and kind of all that statistics and appeal. I think it's always been part of me, but it's really fun to apply it professionally, right? Because there is just a lot of value often in coming back to the numbers and understanding, like, well, what causes what, and how do I better make decisions on how to spend my time, right?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting sort of crossover. And on Moneyball, real quick, is anyone excited about the possibility about Billy Beane and his organization buying the Boston Red Sox, who wouldn't pay him enough that he would take the job? How about that? That's a way to get yourself a job, is to buy the company, right?
I love it.
No, it's a fun saga, right? I think he's a fun one to follow.
No doubt.
Moneyball 2 is coming.
Well, and you talked a little bit about your role. So first, I mean, we know what your title is, right? But often that belies what your day-to-day is. So tell us a little bit about Alloy, and then tell us a little bit about how you spend your day, because I would think that somebody with your sales gifts and your awareness of the role that data and that various points of view play in the sales process, I bet you get it pretty engaged in the sales process, but I want to hear it from you first.
Yeah. So should we start with the role or Alloy? Because
Your call.
Yeah. Maybe start. It might feel a little backwards, but start with the role maybe first, and then we can dive into Alloy. So from a role perspective, as the VP of Client Solutions, my organization is responsible for the second a customer becomes a customer on, right? So once a customer becomes a customer, we've got to go and get in the weeds of data implementation and project management, but also training, enablement programs, support. And then probably on top of that is, well, how do we create a really vibrant user community? How do we think about best practices and making sure that we're providing that value for customers? And so that's sort of the broad broad brushstrokes of the team, I'll say you're right. I do still stay really involved with a good number of specific projects. I think that's just a super gratifying part of the job, and you never want to lose touch of what the actual customer or user experienced with Alloy and like how we can improve. I'll also say just selfishly, like I love, my last role, and not to disparage it, I love my last company, but like oftentimes we were selling software to other software companies, right? Mm-hmm. So you're implementing software at a software company. And there were days when you just feel like, man, I'm pretty removed from the real economy here, right? Like we are on top of something on top of something. What's really cool about being able to be involved with our customers is our customers make things. They make things that I buy, that my friends know about. And that's super gratifying because we find a lot of people are really passionate about it. One of our customers is Ferrero Rocher. They make Nutella and Crunch Bars and Tic Tacs, and you may look at that and say, oh, well, is that really earth shattering to get chocolate to people? But yeah, actually,
yes,
it's real, right? And
Butterfingers, by the way, right?
Yes,
so important supply chain, putting that on the shelves, getting us through the pandemic. Come on.
Yeah, I don't think that you can overestimate the importance of chocolate.
Amen.
Particularly in this day and age. I appreciate your contribution to the goodness of society through supply chain.
Well, Nutella is a different level for a lot of people too, right? That's not just a nice commodity. That's a must-have.
In Europe, that's a basic breakfast food, right?
Exactly.
You can hardly eat anything without Nutella in Europe.
Exactly. And so, staying involved in the day-to-day, being able to see those customer problems. And then we're also, making sure we're operating at scale, right? And so that's part of the day-to-day as well. But it's a little bit of everything, which keeps it, I think, pretty exciting, pretty fun.
Very good. So I'm curious about, as you go through your day, what's the kind of favorite or most energizing thing that you do in a day?
Yeah, that's a good question. I still just love, and I know I've already sort of mentioned this, but getting on directly with supply chain operators, oftentimes for the first or second time, and being able to kind of introduce them to Alloy and sort of customize it with them, because, and I know this is going to seem promotional, but it's also true. The feedback is always, wow, this is awesome, right? And so it's really gratifying to be able to come in and make people's lives a little bit easier, because I do feel for kind of the current supply chain tech stack, like there's a lot of old systems, a lot of old process. It's not built to be consumer facing, really. And so moving from maybe really monolithic ERP systems into this is just a really fun sort of experience. It's easy for me because all I have to do is kind of hit, sign up, and they can jump in and get that experience. So I think that's really energizing for me. I also have the chance to get into like pre-sales conversations. Those are pretty fun when prospects like asking about Alloy and we're kind of doing discovery. That's a pretty fun process as well, as you kind of get things kicked off.
I love your passion for the product and the value that it delivers. That is so important, particularly with what you all do to get so much joy and gratification out of the benefit that your customers get out of your product. So we probably ought to get to that at some point. So tell us a little bit about how the marketplace uses your product and what it does, the main benefit that it offers, right?
Yeah, no, happy to, absolutely. So at the highest level, Alloy is a platform that's designed to be a central nervous system for supply chains. So really getting
a central nervous system for supply chain.
Yeah, I was drinking that in, Scott.
Yes.
A little neuroscience influence there, maybe.
I love that. I really do.
He's a Stanford grad, Scott. So we are outclassed. He is way smarter than we are.
Right.
So exactly, right. It's that end-to-end supply chain visibility, right? That supply chains are complicated, and being able to stitch that together is really critical. And then on top of that, we recognize that organizations just need to be able to respond to change in as near real time as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And the key to us is, how can we avoid the bullwhip effect? How can we make sure that we are really staying on top of a dynamic sort of consumer behavior, and just drive that decision making as a result? I think just a broader context, we all know that there's been a big shift in commerce, right? Markets are super global. There's a lot of sort of non-traditional competitors. I mean, Amazon's the really big disruptor, but there's a lot more going on that's driving change in consumer behavior. And then, COVID has just accelerated a lot of this and added uncertainty, and kind of change, right? We have a lot of conversations with our customers around, well, are these new consumer preferences going to stick?
Right.
What magnitude are they going to stick at? And to me, I don't think we know, right? I mean, we can take our educated guess, but I think it's much more, maybe area of concern, area of influence, right? It's much more important to keep a close watch on that point of sale, and make sure you've got that infrastructure to respond accordingly, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I
So,
think,
yeah.
along these lines, I think it's really interesting, coming out of NRF, where we had several breakout sessions. There's a lot of research that points to some of the different generations and their preferences, and how sustainable they're going to be post pandemic, when we really break into that in a very meaningful and widespread way. I saw one article by a robotics firm that pointed to research specifically around BOPUS, buy online, pick up in store. And there's still plenty of companies, unfortunately, that haven't gotten that right. And it pointed to companies are going to leave based off one, maybe two experiences. But as the discussions we were putting out there into the feed, a lot of folks were saying, well, if company A doesn't get it right, they're just going to go find company B or company C that does get that particular method right, and they're going to cultivate that loyalty. So it really is, from a consumer behavioral standpoint and preferences standpoint, and how sustainable these preferences are going to be. It's a fascinating time right now to study retail, isn't it, Logan?
Absolutely. Yeah. Talking to a consumer electronics brand, the head of sales there thinks this is going to be a really consistent sort of drastic shift in consumer behavior for his vertical, because, are people going to go back to Best Buy and put on the headset, right? I mean, there are some really real shifts in behavior that's just hard to predict. But I think we have to acknowledge that there's going to be shifts, and we got to make sure we get in front of that.
Yep.
Yeah, no doubt.
Well, my hunch would be one of the other things that clearly stood out in a lot of our recent conversations is that pace of digital transformation, and just how, we've seen that great quote, Greg, on one live stream where the gentleman talked about what businesses were thinking about doing in 2025, is being implemented in a year like 2020 or 2021. And I bet
Right.
that's, for a model like Alloy, and please, let's make sure folks know exactly how that, what that does. I bet you just can't deploy the armies and the platform fast enough.
Yeah, no, I do think, especially the last 6-9 months, there's just been a lot more focus or urgency around real digital transformation of the supply chain, right? And, it's just not, to your point, Scott, it's not acceptable to be able to say, oh, well, things are going okay, right? Maybe service levels are where they need to be, maybe on-shelf availability where it needs to be. But the world's changing, right? And retailers are providing way more data, and they do that with an expectation. The expectation is you're going to use it, right? And so with all this data and transparency, brands have a lot more on them to go and execute and compete, right? So no, I absolutely agree that there's a lot of sort of acceleration happening, sort of in this context. And so, the bottom line from my experience and perspective is just supply chains aren't responsive enough. you've got lost sales from out of stock. Maybe you've got some channels that are overstocked, your service levels are suffering, and that retailer expectation of hey, you got to go and deliver at a higher level. So I guess, to come back to, okay, central nervous system, that's all good and well. I think in a bit more specificity where Alloy fits, we're all about connecting data and teams to make sure products where it needs to be. And how that works is we started from building a really impressive data platform, because from our perspective, that's the hardest piece to solve for, because you've got potentially, dozens, if not 100+ retail channels. You've got your distributors, you've got your own networks, you've got your own product identifiers. So being able to bring all of this data into one place and allowing it to kind of talk with each other, that's a hard problem to solve. And that's where we start, right? Which is, we know you need all of these data inputs to make meaningful data-driven decisions. And the reason you aren't in most cases is because, your ERP uses your own product identifier and maybe talks about it in cases. And then your retailers have thousands of stores and their own identifiers and fiscal calendars. And it's just a daunting task to say, how do we get all this to kind of come together? And so once we have all that data in place and it's coming in real time and it's harmonized, well, then it's just the sky's the limit, right? Oftentimes we have supply chain operators leading us along on like, whoa, now I can do this, now I can do that. And so it's once it's all in one place, now we're all about, how do we sense opportunities throughout the network? How do we prioritize those based on purchase orders at risk or lost sales from out of stock or service levels? And then, how do we diagnose the issue and solve it, right? Because that's what it's got to get to is we got to go after the highest value issues. We got to be able to diagnose why it's an issue, and we have to be able to go and solve it.
Love that.
So Logan, if I'm walking down the hallway in my company and I'm scratching my head, what's the scratching my head moment or the painful issue that's going through my head that makes me go, I need to call those folks at Alloy? What is that thing, right? What is the pain I'm running away from?
Yeah, no, I think everybody knows, and maybe it's a little presumptuous, but I think everybody knows academically that this is all fueled by what's happening at the cash register, at the point of sale, right? And so much pain in supply chain is caused because I don't have a grip on really what's going on at the point of sale. So, hey, why didn't we know about this sooner? It took us a month to adjust forecast, or why are we cutting this order and not that order? And so fundamentally, I think that there's an understanding that, hey, at the point of sale, that's what matters and what people are doing. And I think that when you look at kind of the common way supply chains approach their managing their network is around sell in, right? What am I shipping in? What are my fill rates? How do I minimize, transportation costs, carrying costs? But ultimately, those are all sort of, secondary measures. And so, I think that supply chain leaders who want to be more responsive based on consumer demand and not be blindsided by sort of supply chain firefighting, that's really what you're solving. If you're spending so much of your time just fighting fires, trying to get answers, right? If the argument is, does Walmart have an on-shelf availability issue or not? If that's the argument and not, hey, Walmart does have an on-shelf availability issue and we need to solve it, then that I think is a pain that you can get past by bringing Alloy in.
You're speaking to the folks that put product on the shelves at Walmart, just to be clear, right?
Well, kind of both, right? An example here, coming back to Ferrero, they launched a new product, the Kinder Joy egg. And it's a fun story because, man, that's been around for years globally, right? One of our founders is from Italy and grew up with this, but it's the Kinder egg, chocolate egg, with a toy inside of it. But the US FDA doesn't want, toys in food, right? And so Ferrero worked to kind of get this product launched, and it was a massive product launch, right? Now, product launches just exaggerate these issues even more, right? Because it's so much harder to forecast and predict what it's going to look like. And you're going to do your best, but there's always going to be that need in real time to manage that. And what happened was kind of an executive meeting, and what came up with, a broader executive audience was, hey, a major retailer just placed a massive order for Kinder Joy, right? Massive order that everybody felt like this is not what we expected the load-in to look like. What do we do, right? And at that point, Ferrero had Alloy, and the VP of supply chain in the call was able to say, all right, I know what's going on at the retailer. I see their order forecast. I see their POS forecast. I see their inventory position. This is a load in, but it's going to go back to normal because I can see the weeks of supply right away, kind of dynamically in real time.
They're piling up 90 days supply, so they're not going to have to order for the next 90 days or whatever, right?
Exactly. And you think about another reality, it's like, let's get off the call. Let me go back to this team. Let's collate the data. Let's debate the weeks of supply methodology. And let's come back. And in the meantime, we're all panicked because do we need to go and adjust production? Do we need to go and expedite freight? And so that's
all these different
really,
levers. Yeah.
Exactly.
Not to mention it probably takes 2 to 3 weeks to do what you just described in a lot of scenarios, right? Using spreadsheets or whatever the other planning mechanism may be, right?
And you don't know what it's going to be, right? So the flexibility to come in and kind of investigate is super important. And it's that second question that, again, typically results in another week or two cycle, right? Like I got your answer from the data, but now I have that follow-up question. I got to go back to the drawing board with a team of analysts to get to that next step. Yeah. And so we're really trying to just massively accelerate those iteration cycles to get to the right answer.
And that week or two, it can be deadly. I mean, that week or two could mean empty shelves in hundreds of locations, perhaps. Huge lost sales opportunities, amongst other things.
Yeah, I mean, it could destroy the launch, frankly. When you're launching a new product, you can't afford to be out of stock because it could literally kill the product.
Excellent
It happens
point.
all the time.
So I want to shift gears here for a second, if that's all right with you. I want to talk about relationships. And, as we all learned, as many learned perhaps more painfully than others, relationships mattered in droves in a year like 2020, right? Especially when it was so challenging to really vet potential new relationships. So not that you were stuck with who brought you to the dance, but in many ways you kind of were. Right. But those long-standing relationships proved in so many cases to be incredibly valuable. So I want to talk about, we're talking about bridge building, right? And there's so many, we've been a part of so many conversations around kind of to generalize a bit, the supply chain side and the sales side, right? And there's plenty of other shareholders around the table, but we've had a lot of fun with this type of conversation going back years and years from our earliest days in one particular industry association. So in the spirit of building bridges, let's talk about building bridges between sales and supply chain. But let's do so first, Logan. Set the table a bit, because these two different shareholders are looking for different things. They have different motivations, and there's some differences. Speak to that first.
Yeah, no, I think we run into this pretty often, right? And probably starting with, hey, these groups have different incentives, different motivations. And it's not all bad to not be completely aligned, right? You get checks and balances built in there. But, starting with that sales side, their job is really fundamentally to drive that sell-in and manage those retailer relationships. And I just can't imagine, I sold insurance, right? But I can relate to how hard it is to source and negotiate and close a deal. I can't imagine how maddening it would be at the end of that to turn around and just not have product to complete the sale, right? And so you've got this strong entity and organizations with a really justified goal of, hey, we got to go hit sell in and have high and have high fill rates, right? But then on the flip side, you've got supply chain, and yeah, they want to have high service levels, absolutely. But there's also other factors, right? Minimizing those transportation costs, minimizing carrying costs. Some organizations, there's freshness, avoiding spoils, returns that they take into account here, right? And this is often where a lot of the disagreements happen. We had kind of an interesting project we did with a Fortune 50 company that I think is a pretty good example of how these incentive mismatches play out. So this Fortune 50 company, they brought us in into their hair care division, and the project was a little different. We went upstream. So, hey, we're the hair care division. We manufacture the product. We have a raw material supplier, and we're not collaborating like we should. And so what we want to do is, as the brand manufacturer, we want to give access to the data of our usage forecasts and our inventory levels. And then what we want in return from this raw material supplier is their inventory levels, their allocation, and their plans. And as we got to the individual contributors, everybody's terrified, right? Because, well, I don't want to show my cards. And if you really boil it down, well, what does the brand manufacturer really want? The brand manufacturer wants, whenever I order product, I want it there. I want it there on the day that I want it, right? Like, that's what they want. Similar to sort of that sales mentality. And then on the supplier mentality, it's, I've got other customers. I can't carry too much inventory that costs me money. I can't be expediting freight every other day. And so you have these two entities. And what we found is we brought the data together. Everybody's a little uncomfortable, and that's okay, right? Because what you introduce to the equation now is an objective referee, right? What is the objective referee? Well, I know where you're at. You know where I'm at. And now, instead of arguing about that or spinning that, we can all be on the same page and get to the next conversation, which is, what do we do about it, right? And so, yeah, I think it's helpful to acknowledge that difference of incentives from a supply chain and a sales perspective, and then using kind of that understanding where people are coming from. It's a good first step to start thinking through how we can maybe better collaborate or more effectively collaborate.
Perfect. I just knew you were going to say that they're going to be a part of the same central nervous system. It was a perfect opportunity there, Logan. So I'm gonna stick with that because in my mind that's a wonderful visual, and I love the neuroscience connection there to Kate. Right. All right. So let's back to bridging the gap, and I love that phrase right now because we need bridge builders in so many different ways across not just industry but civilization. So let's talk about what bridges some of the gaps that you've just illustrated.
Well, yeah. And I think the first thing is, hey, admit you got a problem, right? And we talked a little bit about this, but status quo or just okay in this regard isn't going to cut it, right? You can always improve, bring it down. I mean, OTIF fines are such a big topic with a lot of our customers. Like this.
What was that?
OTIF fines.
Okay.
On time, in full. So delivering the entire order when it's expected, completely filled. Yeah.
Perfect.
And a lot of retailer relationships will fine you as an organization if you're consistently cutting their orders or you're late. And this has become a really kind of big piece for a lot of supply chains. So you've got kind of that headwind, but then you've got this expectation you're going to use the data, and just lots of your competitors now taking more and more advantage of this. So I think, to me, organizations probably already are spending a lot of time and resources to try and solve this. And so it's not just about improving business results, but it's also just becoming more efficient, because, a month-long S&OP process just costs a lot of money in terms of time, effort, energy. I guess fundamentally, maybe I'll share a story because I think it's an interesting one that maybe sets the stage a little more here. When we were first building out our more like supply chain oriented use cases and functionality, Part of that process was we did kind of general discovery. So you want to go and meet people, learn more about what they do, learn more about their pain points. And I remember a conversation we had with a demand planner who, was walking us through their S&OP process. And, it's, hey, week 1, we bring the data together. Week 2, we kind of come up with some initial insights of what to do. Week 3, we bring in stakeholders and we all argue. And then week 4, maybe we go and take action, right? So it's a big process, lots of investment. And someone on my team asked, like, well, that sounds great. Like, how good is this process? Like, how often do you have to change the plan after you've made it? And he said, I change the plan in month every single day. Every single day I change it, right? And so then the follow-up question, kind of these naive, hey, let's start to get a feel for this space, was, well, why do you spend so much time trying to predict the future in sort of this monolithic process when you know you're going to be wrong? And he said, I've been asking that my whole career, right? Good question. And not to minimize, like S&OP processes are critical, right? And you should be looking to get better at forecasting, predicting the future, collaborating together. But you're never going to predict the future perfectly, right? And we find that organizations aren't investing enough time in the other piece of this, which is knowing that our plans aren't going to go according to plan. Are we ready? So kind of coming back to that, original question, I like to think about it across 3 dimensions, right? Like, how do we better help sales and supply chain collaborate effectively towards a kind of common goal? The first, we've kind of already talked about this, but is data. So, we're all looking at different numbers, different sources of truth, and only part of the picture. Supply chain teams are looking at ERPs, planning tools, forecasting tools. The retail teams and the sales teams are looking at their spreadsheets and their portals. And whenever one, has a question or wants to have a conversation, there's this really cumbersome and sometimes sort of impossible process to enable that to happen. So I think the other piece to this, because we've talked a fair amount about the data component,
right,
is around incentives, but then also around team structure and process. So another example I think was really fun to see from as kind of a vendor was another one of our customers. It's a consumer electronics company. And I don't want to intimidate, people who are listening, because you don't have to be as radical as this brand to really make an impact. But I thought it was a really cool way of approaching this problem. So first they brought Alloy in to kind of just bring it all together, right? So now we've got common data. We've solved that data problem. But then the next step that the sales leader took, because this was a sales-driven sort of transformation, was, hey, let's not compensate. Let's change our comp structure. In the past, the sales team had been comped on sell in. Let's change it, because that's maybe we can now. Let's actually comp our salespeople on sell through. So what that did right away was really align the organization on, okay, now we're only interested at the point of sale. So that just helps get everybody a little bit more aligned. And this wasn't just a change on paper. I can remember as we were going through this, so we've been working with this customer for 6-9 months. They're going through this change on the comp plan. And I got an email and I was CC'd on it. And the subject line, this was from the head of sales. All it said in the subject line was worst in the world. That was it. And then in the body of the email, it had a screenshot from Alloy, which was lost sales from out of stock. So at the point of sale, each retailer. And the email was to the #1 kind of out of stock violator retail team. I never met these guys. It's not a great way to be introduced to people. Like, hey, you're CC'd on this email where my boss is saying worst in the world. But it was like, hey, we're gonna buy into this. Like, we're gonna shift incentives a little bit, and we're gonna be focused collectively at the point of sale. And then the last sort of shift they made after this sort of took root was, well, we've got a bunch of retailers that we sell through, but we only have maybe 10 or 15 that represent 80% of our business. So they restructured their organization a bit to have retailer specific sort of task force teams, where now they were a lot more aligned organizationally, where the major retail team had someone from supply chain, someone from sales, someone from finance. And it was, I think, really transformational, right? I mean, we saw in-stock rates go up considerably. We saw forecast accuracy go up. A lot of efficiencies gained in kind of narrowing that in terms of like the process and the teams that were involved.
So if I want to get Greg involved here for a second, because, Greg, we talked about, we talked about it through almost 560 something episodes now. Your retail background, your automotive industry background, I bet Logan is bringing some memories based on your time there, especially earlier in your career. What do you, as Logan's talking about some different ways to bridge these gaps, what's a couple of things that really stick out that maybe folks need to really wrap their heads around?
Yeah, well, I think that what they need to understand is that it is a very penalizing culture right now in the retail world. I mean, I was in retail more than 2 decades ago, and if you're a community member, you know what that means.
That's right.
I remember doing that exact thing. I remember one thing Logan said was spinning a problem rather than addressing and resolving the problem, or sometimes even actually trying to hide the problem. I've seen vendors do that. I can't tell you the number of times I had to get on a plane and fly to somewhere to meet with the vendor in person to get to the bottom of the issue, right? And what we tried was the carrot first. And if someone didn't respond, then we tried the stick. What we never really tried, and admittedly, this was a lot of years ago in retail, what we never really tried was to really, very often, we did a few times, but to get together and collaborate. There were a few vendors. I mean, we were the biggest customer of a number of our vendors. So there were a number of vendors where we did that. But yeah, I mean, what I think this technology does, and the approach, particularly the approach that Logan and his team take, is to open up the data flows, to open up the information other than data flows, and to start the more collaborative relationship. In fact, back in the 90s, there was this thing called CPFR, Collaborative Planning, Forecasting, and Replenishment.
Yeah.
It was an incredible flop. It only worked for the company that started it, Walmart, and only because they were Walmart. But other than that, it was an incredible flop. Why? Because Walmart could spend $400 million a year supporting it, and no one else could. Now, we have effectively democratized collaboration among enterprises with technologies like Alloy and others out there that connect their data, that connect their people, that identify the initiatives and allow resolution, sometimes even on the platform.
Yeah, love that. I appreciate your perspective there. I think that brings it home for many folks that may still be wrapping their head around Logan and Alloy and the platform and some of the needs and the application. So love that. All right. So Logan, I know that it's tough to do what you do and Alloy justice in an hour-long conversation. Before we talk, there's a couple things we've got coming up, but I want to make sure, is there any other anecdote that you'd like to share before we move on to what a really cool thing y'all got coming up on February 18th?
Well, it kind of dovetails into that, right? Because I don't know if I've mentioned Valvoline yet, and I'd be remiss. They're a lot of fun. During COVID, I grew up my beard, believe it or not, and I got on a call with those guys, and they gave me the nickname Joe Dirt, because they could really. I couldn't. So
there are worse nicknames. That's a good one.
So I was the oil buyer at one time at the auto parts chain I worked for, and Valvoline was by far our best vendor. I mean, I can't say anything about where they are now, but they were always so much more aware of what we didn't even call supply chain, just replenishment, whatever, right? They were so much more aware of that than any of the vendors we had, any of the other vendors. And we carried all of the usual suspects in terms of oil.
So Logan, you earned a nickname, which is always a great sign, term of endearment. So give us some backdrop for this February 18th event.
Yeah, no, Valvoli's been a customer for a while, and I would just echo that. Greg, they've kept the momentum going, right? I mean, they're just a super well run organization. I think great collaboration across sales and supply chain, and we've done some really cool work with them. More fundamentally on how do we best manage at the retailer level, and some cool stories there on one example where a retailer came in, ordered a bunch of inventory that same day. The whole organization was on the same page. We can't fill this order. And the sales team was able to go back to the vendor or to the retailer and say, hey, you don't need this order. Look, you've got plenty of coverage. Can we bring this down? So it's just great sorts of collaboration. It's an exciting event. They've taken us to the next level where we do a lot around, hey, show me where I'm hurting in the supply chain more generally. So their director of supply chain, Eric Rossi, great thought partner. And that's really how he's taking advantage of Alloy. We're helping him in VMI relationships. We're helping him do a lot more projection into the future. So, hey, simulate for me when I'm going to have a problem 3 weeks from now, 6 weeks from now, 12 weeks from now, because I don't want to spend my time with issues that have already happened. I want to prevent those issues into the future.
Right.
And we'll unpack that more with Eric, but it's a really cool sort of next gen way you can take advantage of a tool like Alloy as you bring in your ERP data, your forecasts, and your point of sale. So no, very much endorse joining with Eric. We're going to be doing that. Let's see. I think we have the date on that.
February 18th.
Thank you. Yeah, you've got it there for us, Scott. So, and then I think we shared the link here, or can share the link here to that webinar. But really excited to hear more about him. And yeah, it's just I think a good story and a good kind of industry thought leader to be able to hear more about how they're taking advantage of Alloy, but just more generally how they're managing in sort of a unique time. With a seasonal product that has maybe less predictable than it's been in the past, and how he can kind of walk us through how they've managed that.
Love it. I mean, as a brand, any car driver will instantly know. And it's always been cool, I think, since, for the 15, 20 years I've been in supply chain, uncovering, the supply chain and the operations and the leadership behind these brands that you've had their products in your hands so many times in your lifetime. Logan, going back to the thing you love, working with companies that make stuff, right? Keep the economy moving, that make consumers happy. I think it's fascinating. So February 18th at 12 noon Eastern time, we're going to have the link in the show notes, make it easy for folks, one click to check it out and then register. So check that out. And they can bring their questions to the event, I'm sure, Logan, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm just moderating, so you don't have to hear me talk anymore. It's going to be Eric. So absolutely, there'll be Q&A, and you'll be able to have more of an interactive sort of dynamic with Eric there.
Awesome. Well, love checking back in with what the Alloy team has been doing. They've been on the move. If you may not know this, Logan, Joel was on a webinar way back when, in our earliest days. Mm-hmm. In fact, I think before even we were podcasting. And it's neat to have put our finger on the pulse as y'all have continued to grow and innovate and help more organizations. And we've got some things moving forward, beyond your webinar, a live stream around the corner, some other things. So it's really neat to be able to share what y'all are doing and joining the conversations we're having in our community. And I can't, Greg, if we've enjoyed this conversation as much, wait before we put them on stage live. On the other live. So it's going to be great fun. Yeah. So final question, $1 trillion question. Let's, beyond the webinar and beyond all the cool stuff you've shared, beyond the Geckos, how can folks connect with you, you and the Alloy team?
Yeah, if you need a gecko, reach me at
right.
No, it's been fun to get to know you guys and jump more into your community. So feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Alloy is at alloy.ai, so you can kind of get a better feel for the company and kind of where we're at. And then like we said, the webinar is going to be a good place for Q&A and a good place to kind of continue the conversation.
Awesome. So neat. Logan, again, so much more I'm sure you could share. I'd love to get y'all two over an adult beverage, talking retail and exchanging some other stories, including some nicknames. But we'll save that for a later time. Really have enjoyed talking with Logan Ensign, Vice President Client Solutions with Alloy. Logan, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks a bunch. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah,
Definitely.
great
We'll
having
have you
Logan.
back. All right. So, Greg, great conversation. Really enjoyed this. I know that this really gets your juices going because retail and forecasting and supply chain leadership and especially technology, because you're our resident technologist of the bunch. I mean, a wide-ranging conversation we've had here today, huh?
Well, this is a segment of supply chain that I came up in, first of all, retail and direct to consumer and brand relationships and that sort of thing. And then, of course, what we did at Blue Ridge was this sort of product for retailers and distributors. So it's a great, it's a great problem solving solution. And I love the enterprise operability, a word we both learned today, Scott. Operability. Is that right? Did I say that
Yeah,
right?
I think you nailed it.
I'm
gonna go with
we've
it.
said it a half dozen times today, haven't we? But that enterprise operability, that enterprise engagement is really critical in this day and age. And you guys both alluded to it, not just the relationships as they are from management to management standpoint, but the relationships in terms of data and information and collaboration throughout the organization that help companies recognize that they have to engage their partners to meet the requirements of who ultimately we are all serving, and that's the consumer, because the consumer owns and is the beginning and the end of the supply chain.
Love that. I love that. And, I love this notion, bridging gaps and doing so with the central nervous system. I love that. Such a powerful visual. So I'm going to be talking to my kids later on about that. So thanks so much for that lesson, Logan. So to our audience, hopefully you enjoyed this conversation as much as I have. It's fascinating to see how the retail world has navigated through a year like 2020 and into 2021 with so many lingering, things that just challenges that have just followed us into this new year. But it's fascinating to see how retailers are using and consumer good manufacturers are using technologies like Alloy to serve, as Greg said, the consumer, the start and the finish to global supply chain. So if you enjoy this conversation as much as we have, be sure you check out similar conversations at supplychainnow.com. Be sure to subscribe for free so you don't miss conversations just like this. We offer a money back guarantee, Greg, right?
That's right.
So on that note, big thanks for joining us here today. Big thanks to the Alloy team, of course, Logan. On behalf of Greg White, our whole team here at Supply Chain Now, Scott Luton signing off for now. Hey, do good, give forward, and be the change that's needed. And on that note, we'll see you next time here on Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.